Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And I think you all know I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, please welcome Lydia Michael, author of the book and owner of Blended Collective, a marketing and brand consulting firm with a focus on culture and emotion, and the author of Brand Love. Lydia, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Well, it is so good. I think you're the first author I've had from Detroit, so I'm so glad to have someone from the Motor City.
That's exciting. Happy to represent the city.
Well, that's great, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Absolutely.
So, Lydia, let's start off with you telling us about your professional background and how you got to where you're at now.
Yeah. So I kicked it off with Blended Collective back in 2017 after I had spent 2 years again in my German hometown going to grad school there. And so I came back to the US shortly after and was doing a little bit of soul searching, but honestly was also looking at the Michigan market and at the gap that exists in the space of marketing and culture, and discovered that I wanted to do something that not only provided value to the community, but also really fulfilled a passion of mine, which again is the international marketing space, but also very heavily intertwined with culture. So I decided to start Blended Collective then, and things have kind of spiraled from there into speaking opportunities. And I also am an adjunct professor at a local university now. I'm going to be teaching a class in Germany this fall. So I feel like things have sort of fallen into place much better than I could have planned for. And so that was kind of the start of Blended Collective. And anything prior to that, I was always focused on the international marketing space across different industries. So whether it be, the music and entertainment space for some time, I also worked on a project with L'Oreal in Germany that I write about in the book prior to me returning to the US, and have really gathered a lot of different experience across marketing and culture over the years.
So, what made you're a Detroit native, and how's Detroit doing now? Because I think everybody's always kind of have had a negative impression over the last 20, 30 years that Detroit is a dying city, but I've kind of heard that it's starting to revive.
I will correct you real quick. I am not a Detroit native, so I was actually born and raised in Germany. I
Ah,
didn't come here until much later in life. So, but Detroit now is definitely home for me. So it's a very interesting place to be. And I think when I came back to the city and started my company, I also wanted to be part of the city being revived and figure out how to find my place in all of that. And yeah, we're very, very much focused on the community and the work that we do, and the businesses that we work with definitely span outside of the city, but it's a big passion of ours to be involved here in the community and in the community growth.
so what made you write this book?
So it's actually an interesting story because I was working at L'Oreal in Germany. This was 2016, and I also wrote my master thesis with them. And during that time, as I was writing the thesis, my supervisor at the time said, well, we really want you to focus on this new project that we're working on. It's a rebrand for Garnier Fructis. And we want your help in research as it relates to how you can launch a hair care brand in the German market, or how you can relaunch that using the concept of brand love. And I looked at him and I remember saying, that sounds really excited. I'm in, but I'm not sure what brand love entails. And so that's kind of where that whole research process started. And so, forward a few years later, I was back in the US, I had my own business. A lot of the work that I was doing with my own clients, I tried to integrate the concept of brand love, which for those of you who haven't read the book yet, here on this podcast today, I kind of took it upon myself to define the term brand love. And it really is this emotional connection between brands and customers that ultimately result in loyalty and advocacy. So using that concept in my work, I really became, I don't know if I should use the word obsessed, but I was very passionate about that topic, and it kind of continued to grow and evolve with me as I was evolving in the business. And so I started speaking at national marketing conferences, one of the bigger ones, Digital Summit in different states. And so as I would do that, I would always speak about brand love. That was sort of the topic that I had identified that nobody was really tapping into much, the idea of emotional marketing. And so that kind of became my topic. And so in speaking about that, I felt like I had so much information and so much research gathered over the years that I wanted to share it with a larger group of people, but do so in a very unique way, which is through the lens of culture, which was kind of my unique differentiator in that space. And so I shared that with a mentor of mine at the time that I wanted to write a book. And he said, I totally think you should. This is going to be a game changer. It's really going to elevate you even on a business level as well as personal. And so I started talking with some friends in the industry who had written books and self-published books, and then decided in 2021 that somehow that felt like a little too much work for what I was dealing with at the time, right? I was running a business, still am, but it just felt like it was almost impossible to accomplish at the time. So I kind of put that idea aside. And sure enough, Mark, 6 months later, I get an email from my then acquisitions editor from my now publisher, Bronwyn, and she sends me an email and she says, "Hey, I saw you speak about this topic at this conference. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I did not even think that that email was legit, simply because I had just thought about that. I had talked to people about it. I had just put it aside. And a few months later, I get this email. And so I start researching the editor. I start researching the publisher. I remember that a friend of mine who had moved here from Germany and worked in the licensing and publishing world in the German market had to know who that publisher was. So I remember sending it to her and asking her about them. And she's like, "Yes, I do know them. They're an independent business book publisher and you have to speak to them. And this is a great opportunity." And so the rest is history. I ended up doing that with my now publisher.
Fantastic. And do you think you're going to write additional books now you've written one?
I can't promise that. People continue to ask if I'm writing the second one already, but I think I don't want to add the pressure of having to write a second book. I think if it comes naturally and if the topic makes sense, that's great. I was never actually one of those people that had writing a book as a goal on her list. It was more so the opposite way. It was the fact that I felt like I had a lot of information and a unique perspective to share about a topic that I felt was going to be more and more relevant in marketing over the years. And so the way to get that out for me then was through writing a book.
Well, it was well done. So let's jump into the book. There's an application of emotional and rational drivers. You mentioned that brand love is a combination where emotional and rational drivers meet and that both are required for success. Could you provide more specific examples from your career of how brands successfully blend these emotional and rational drivers to foster brand love among their customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the emotional drivers, all they are, and the rational drivers, all they are really descriptors or drivers of how that marketing journey can be enriched to ultimately create that loyalty and advocacy. So, on the emotional side, whether it's things like transparency and authenticity, or on the rational side, consistency and convenience, things of that nature. I think as long as we're able to create a balance of that, a successful blend of those drivers, brands are able to tap into their audiences in a much better and more efficient way. So I'll give you an example in the brand world, not a company we've worked with, but a company that a lot of people know, which is Glossier. And it's a beauty company essentially. And I think emotionally, they have managed to cultivate a really strong community, or a community feel by engaging with consumers on social media and just emphasizing the value of authenticity and self-expression in marketing. And this is something that especially for the millennial and the Gen Z demographic, um, has been really crucial. And so this brand does a good job by the on the way of how they connect on an emotional level by again promoting beauty in like everyday life, without the airbrushed unreality of what we typically see in the beauty industry, right? Your typical Photoshop and all of these different changes that are just creating all of these unrealistic beauty standards. Rationally, they back up their products with clear, simple, and transparent ingredients, and also their production process. And so that I think just kind of reassures the health conscious and younger consumer or customer about the quality and the safety of all of those purchases. So again, I think the balance of heart and mind appeals really strongly to their target audience, and that is what allows them to create this brand loyalty. Um, and in general, I just want to add, I think the beauty industry, as I mentioned in the book, is a unique space where you can get inspiration from, because whether it's the customization aspect of the product or diversifying the industry or just embracing sort of this natural beauty and authenticity to mirror the self, I think those are all great values to highlight one of the core emotional drivers, which is authenticity.
I was really surprised. A week ago, we had another author, and she worked for Microsoft, and she told the audience that they have 650 storytellers for Microsoft. 650. I didn't think they'd have one, let alone 650, trying to create the emotional connection between Microsoft products and the public. And
How
I
interesting.
mean,
Yeah.
I get it with cosmetics and some other kinds of products where there you can feel that, maybe like amusement parks and so forth because you remember your family, but I just didn't see it for a software product that's used as a business tool
Yeah.
for people. So what do you advise companies, especially that don't have that natural connection? At least I didn't see it with Microsoft, to tell these stories and make that connection with people. And how do you come across as authentic? Because so many Me Too companies, some event happens in the social world and they just copy it just to be able to say that they're part of that. And I find that very unauthentic.
It is very inauthentic, but I think and the customer recognizes that nowadays, right? I mean, you see companies doing that, but I don't know that they're necessarily successful in doing so. I think a big part of it is understanding what your customer is looking for and how you can align your business with their needs and with their wants, and kind of help do that through storytelling. So really telling authentic stories of customers, of employees, versus, top down approach, right? So really looking more of like an outside in approach, like what can we find on the outside that we can bring back inside and kind of share with the world.
Um, you talk about navigating trust and mistakes, and you suggest that trust has become a new brand equity. What strategies do you recommend for brands to rebuild trust and maintain customer relationships after a major mistake or a breach of trust? Are there noteworthy cases or personal experiences where a brand has effectively navigated such a situation?
Yeah, I think in general, a good strategy is always to openly acknowledge the mistake and take full responsibility for what they did, but then also clearly outline the steps that they need to take to rectify the issue and also prevent future occurrences like that. So, and having said that, I think a company that is able to respond in a transparent way always wins. So I'll give you an example, and I believe this is also an example actually that I bring up in the book. KFC in the UK, so Kentucky Fried Chicken, they faced a supply chain issue back in 2018 that led to a chicken shortage. And I mean, just saying that sounds so funny to me because it's like this case gets me every single time. I'm thinking, you're a chicken restaurant, chicken fast food chain. How do you run out of chicken, right? So, and because of that, they had to change or close down a lot of different chains for KFC in the UK. And so they tackled this crisis with a public relations campaign at the time that included a full page ad in a newspaper. And what they did is they reversed the letters of KFC and they arranged it, and it turned into FCK on a chicken
Oh,
bucket.
yeah.
And so they used a lot of humor when they apologized for the mishap, right? So they were very upfront about the issue. They didn't try to hide the fact that it happened because, again, with social media these days, it's almost impossible to hide anything, right? So they're like, okay, well, why brush it under the rug? Let's just admit what we did. Humans make mistakes. Brands are human. Brands make mistakes, right? So they maintained regular communication about updates on the resolution and on the process, and they really took full accountability. But I think the way they chose to do it by not only taking accountability, but also by adding that humor, allowed their brand to display an element of a strong brand personality that goes to show you that, you know, maybe we're not just a chicken fast food chain, yeah, but we're a little bit more, like there's humans behind this company that we're running, and there's people that also make mistakes the same way you do in your daily life. So I think that touch of honesty and creativity can really help with maintaining and even furthering those customer relationships.
Do you find that's more the case when the company is run by the founder than maybe the 18th CEO that's come into the company?
It could be. It could be because I think as a founder, there's an emotional connection that's very natural and organic to the business. And after you've replaced the CEO and you've kind of sold the company so many times, I think that that can get lost a little bit. Even though I will say the right leadership won't lose that element, right? There's a lot of great CEOs out there or CMOs that show that they still understand the customer at the core and operate based on that.
Yeah, I was wondering what kind of CEOs that you've seen that embrace the fact that a mistake was made, own up to it, and then go and apologize for it in an effective way.
I think Delta is a really good example. And I will say, actually, prior to this, I think it's Ad Bastian is his name, if I'm not mistaken. But prior to this current CEO, you couldn't have asked me who the Delta CEO was before, right? But somehow they've done a really good job at communicating and even him kind of being accessible or approachable and publicly available in that space, representing the brand. And even just the emails that I receive, I'm on Delta's email list, and the emails that I receive always seem very human. They seem very connecting. They seem very emotional. They seem like they care, right? Which I'm sure they do. And they've had situations happen too, where, for instance, and this was kind of a good social campaign that was unplanned, but there was a delayed flight, and Delta solved that pretty quickly by ordering a bunch of pizza for customers or passengers that were waiting at the gate. And the next thing you know is people are eating pizza and posting on social media that they just got pizza because the flight is delayed, right? And so it's moments like this, moment marketing, when you're able to tap into moment marketing and really have that work to your benefit. I think that that just helps push that customer love so much further.
I think you're right. I think probably the culture and you got the right name, by the way, for the CEO. I believe the culture he's obviously developed empowered people at the front line to make that decision
Exactly.
and buy that pizza and do the right thing by the people there. That's impressive. If it already came all the way from the top, they know he'd want them to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Cultural influencer marketing. Influencer marketing played a crucial role in the fructose rebrand. How do you go about selecting and vetting influencers to ensure that they align with the brand's core value and target demographic effectively? And can you provide a case where an influencer collaboration either significantly succeeded or failed, and the lessons learned from that experience? And I wanted to ask this question because I've read a lot of studies by Harvard that suggests that the people who have 50 million, 100 million followers, they don't really have that much involvement in the selection of the things that they promote. But the ones who have 50,000 or less followers, they're actually the best influencers to go through and the most authentic. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point because the latter influencers that you just mentioned, the 50,000 or even, 10,000 or less, micro influencers is what they're known as. And micro influencers tend to be a little more genuine, authentic, and organic in the way that they promote things. There also, over the years, have been trust issues with influencers, especially the ones that do have such high following, because you think, okay, they have 50 million followers, they're promoting this product, they're probably getting a fat check in order to say what they're saying. And so there's trust issues that, happen as a result. So I think that micro influencers definitely are being more favored at this time. I don't say more, but they're also, relevant, just if not just as relevant, right? So I think depending on who the brand is and what the resources are, I think that either of those types of influencers can bring tremendous value. For the time when I was working at Garnier Fructis and we were bringing in different influencers to just kind of do different focus groups and interviews and things like that. I remember looking at influencers not only because they had strong following, but also the ones that actually had demographic alignment and also personal brand value alignment with the company. So, the ones that cared about natural beauty or the ones that genuinely embodied the brand's commitment to natural beauty were the ones that we really wanted to tap into. And for those of you who know Garnier Fructis, there are these green shampoo bottles that we've all probably seen. And they're known for their scent and for their fruity ingredients, right? And so making sure that we were able to promote a more health conscious product, sulfate free, paraben free, right? All of those things. We wanted to align that with influencers who cared about that and they cared about what they put in their body as much as what they put on their hair and things like that. So that was really important for us. And I think those were some of the requirements that we use to filter through some of that. So that overall, I think, was extremely successful in that space. I will, to your point, share one quick example that wasn't as successful, and that was one that I actually worked on through my business, Blended Collective, where we had a client and we worked with an influencer for the very first time. And the influencer, unfortunately, there were some digital elements to her commitment and also some offsite event type commitment that we had agreed to. And on the day of the event, and a week prior leading up to the event, the influencer just disappeared. Was no
Wow.
disappeared on us. We tried calling, we tried emailing, and the funny part is she somehow was still active on social. And so I'm thinking, okay, and then the event happens and no word from her beforehand, and she just out of nowhere pops up and is at the event halfway through. And I'm thinking, this is just terrible on every front. I mean, the client understood the situation because it was of no fault of our own, but it just early on in our, in me building the company, just kind of goes to show that relationship building is everything, whether it's an influencer or not, right? Because that could have led to much more opportunities with us as a company, even just by word of mouth and referral basis, but also for the client we were working with, which was a pretty significant client at the time. It could have presented more opportunities for the influencer as a result of that project. I mean, I just think, and till this day, I can't really tell you what happened. I mean, it was, a lot of different excuses, but yeah, I don't know what it is, but that was definitely I would say a failed influencer experience right there.
How bizarre.
Very much so.
How do you go about, what's the criteria you use for selecting an influencer?
So at our company right now, and the way we do things, we are not influencer or influencer focused as heavily, I will say. However, I think that some of the requirements are, really analyzing the brands that the influencer has worked with, the relationships that they've built in the community, especially locally, and even just tapping into some of those connections and having conversations to just understand a little bit more about how the influencer works. Are they responsible? Are they accountable? Do they show up on time? I think there's like a list of different standards, that we used at the time. But I think that that's just important. Talking to people that have worked with them is like the best feedback you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when pitchmen on TV or radio, Tiger Woods or whatever, and people would follow that. But I think people become, as you say, there's a real lack of trust today, and you really have to win people over with integrity. And if you don't have that, that's a real problem.
Agreed.
You mentioned that you often lose interest in brands once they become mainstream because they no longer feel special to you. Given this personal preference, how do you suggest brands balance between maintaining an exclusive, unique appeal and achieving widespread recognition, success that often leads to mainstream popularity? I think luxury brands are having a difficult time right now.
Yeah. I think, maintaining a balance between exclusivity and mainstream success is really important. And so brands can offer, and they do offer, tiered product lines or limited edition releases that cater to a more niche original customer, but at the same time they can still serve the broader market, right? And I think that's kind of where the balance is. So making sure that the approach keeps the core audience feeling special and engaged while still appealing to this wider audience. So, and you mentioned luxury brands or high-end fashion brands, right? I think they
Yes.
do a good job of that a lot of times, depending on the brand. They're able to maintain that exclusivity for sure, especially through their pricing models, but they also offer more accessible collections sometimes in partnership with other brands, right? So we've seen in the past, we've seen luxury brands that partnered with H&M, for instance, very accessible, right, in the fashion world. And they would produce new clothing lines and make them available for a limited period of time at a much more affordable price at places like H&M. So
Do you think that's a good strategy? Because some people feel like I taught at the Wharton School. It sounds like a bunch of Wharton finance people saying, how do we milk this brand in every way, shape, and form? Why don't we just create a lesser brand? It's just like Jaguar, Ford, when they bought Jaguar, they started put the Jaguar emblem even on Ford cars just to, spread that brand halo. And people, I think it backfired for them.
yeah, I think that's a different approach though. Like when you look at the car or the automotive industry in general with, the different lines, I mean, Toyota has Lexus and, and all of those different brands. I think that that's different in the sense that you're creating a completely different brand, and people may or may not know who that parent company is, right? This brand is kind of a standalone brand, and so it comes with its own personality and its own values and its own audience, and sort of just this new entity that exists. And the example that I was sharing for the fashion industry and like the H&M partnership, for instance, there's still strong brand association with that luxury brand. And I think this is also why it does so well, why these collections do so well. And Target has done the same over the years, because there's that alignment of, oh, I'm getting to buy this luxury brand that otherwise I couldn't afford, right? But I'm able to do so thanks to this limited edition. So I think it brings in a whole nother target audience than if you were to just create a less expensive version of that brand. I think you see that a lot less. Can't even think of any right now in the fashion industry. Like you see it in automotive, it's a very, very normal business model, but in fashion, you don't really see that. There's a reason why, why those high-end fashion brands are so exclusive and why they don't create cheaper versions of what they're selling, because their goal is to attract to a very unique and niche market, right? And I think they would lose that even if they were to create um, a less expensive version of their brand.
I wish you were out here in Asia because one of the things that I've noticed in my 16 months here, and it's crazy, the New York Yankee symbol is literally on everything in every Asian country, from
Really?
pocketbooks to underwear to jewelry to sport jackets. There's nobody who doesn't own something that doesn't have the New York Yankee symbol. It's the Yankees for sure. At sneakers, shoes, there's nothing that I've seen. Why do you think that brand I've been to 10 countries and that brand is everywhere. Why do you think the New York Yankees symbol is taken off here in Asia?
That is such a good question. I didn't even know that that was the case, honestly. I don't know. I think in Asia, from what I've seen, and I've only been to Japan, but even at the time when I visited Japan, and it was actually for work when I was working in the music and entertainment industry, we saw an enormous amount of fascination with the US culture in general. So anything that was kind of American, really stood out and people really loved. And in our case at the time, it was, jazz music and the artists and the musicians. And, even if they didn't speak English much, they knew every single word to every song, right? So I think
Yeah,
going back to your example, it could be very similar. I think it's probably created through like pop culture and through media, whether that's social or, TV or, whatever, any type of media over the years. I think that that brand probably created some relevance in the consumer's mind in Asia and just kind of portraying it as a relevant brand. And so people want to be associated with that clearly.
I've literally never seen a brand take off. I'm thinking the Yankees have got to be making way more money in all the products that are sold in Asia with their logo on it. And behind is the Boston Red Sox logo, and behind that, the Dodgers. That's it, it's just those three. But the
Yeah,
Yankees are by far the most pervasive logo, even more so than the flags of countries and their own symbol, the country symbol, doesn't even come close to the Yankees.
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I had no idea.
So you outline the importance of cultural representation and understanding the intersectionality within cultural groups to get better connection with diverse consumers. Can you elaborate on specific strategies or examples of brands that have successfully navigated this complexity to resonate deeply with multicultural audiences without resorting to stereotypes?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with listening to your customers' stories and being able to reflect the authenticity of that message in your brand. So, one example is Coca-Cola's Share a Coke campaign, which I'm sure most of you here on this podcast have heard of, is the campaign that really was meant to create this moment of happiness and this moment of sharedness between family and friends and colleagues. And it included names from diverse ethnic backgrounds on bottles. And I remember when the campaign first came out, they had maybe a few hundred names or so, and you would go to the store. And I remember, looking for my name, which I thought was a pretty generic name, and I couldn't even find my name on the bottle, right? And that was a
Yeah.
little upsetting. But over time, the campaign became so popular on a global scale, they started adding more names to the mix. But then what they also did is they allowed people to go online and be able to print or even order personalized bottles with their names on it. I had one here somewhere in my office that has Blended Collective on it that I got as a gift. And so I think in doing that, it just really helps foster that individual uniqueness, but also the sense of inclusion. And so I think when brands are able to invest in this cultural intelligence and really ensure that they can connect with customers on the basis of culture, I think that that is really a good example. Um, Nike also, I know they've had a recent campaign called The Toughest Athletes, and that celebrates pregnant and breastfeeding athletes as an example. So the campaign was really not only highlighting the strength and the resilience of women, but it also addresses a broader spectrum of both sports and motherhood, right? So just showing that intersectionality, I think, in the way Nike does through this campaign also, again, reflects these diverse identities coming together and showing how the brand extends beyond your, traditional customer as we know it.
How do you feel about when brands take a political stance? Like, and Budweiser got hit hard about this,
Yeah, I
supporting
heard of it.
LGBTQ community, and other brands have also gotten hit when they feel like they're doing something positive.
Yeah.
What's your advice to companies about doing things like that, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, so my advice, my number one advice, is know your customer. And it sounds so simple, right? You would think that a company on that scale with this many resources would have a pretty good understanding of who their main customer is. And I think that's why a lot of times some of these campaigns backfire because they try to do things to fit in with the status quo. And they try to do things because they think this is what people want to hear or this is who we have to be. But you're essentially not being true and authentic to who you are as a brand. And I think that's when it can really backfire and it shows, right? And customers are not afraid to speak up and they're certainly not afraid to replace products like that once they're disappointed, right? And just substitute that. It's a crowded marketplace. There's a lot of other options. Very easy to get rid of a brand, right? So that's one thing. I used to always say, I think that brands and politics should always be separate. That's how we do it at Blended Collective. I don't like to blur the lines, but I also understand when there are companies and brands who do decide to blur the lines, or they feel like it aligns with who they are at the core, right? Speaking out about certain topics might be in association with values that are part of who their brand is, right? So you have companies like Ben and Jerry's in the ice cream world. Everybody that knows Ben and Jerry's knows that they're not just an ice cream company, but they're, social activists. And so
Right.
that's kind of what they do. I mean, they don't just sell a product, but they go beyond that. And so for them, it's important to speak out about voting issues or racial justice and things of that nature, and it makes sense for their brand. Though people expect that from the brand, and maybe there's some people that don't eat their ice cream because of it, because they don't agree with the values. And I don't even think that Ben and Jerry's cares, right? Because they're very particular and very clear on what they stand for and who they're serving. So I think it's always a question of what type of company are you? Who are you at the core? And does the political alignment or any social alignment make sense for your company? Is there a direct connection where people would expect you to say certain things? But when it's just kind of done to tick a box, I think that's where it becomes a little, troublesome.
Yeah, I thought with Budweiser, like you said, they ought to know who their audience is, but I think they've been losing out to microbrewers. And I think they try to say, oh, if we make this cultural shift, then now we'll get this other community on board and we can revive the brand. Because I think that's been kind of a dying brand.
Mhm.
And it kind of blew up in their face because the core
The
of their
core audience.
buyers,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, I wouldn't have advised that if I were them, or they should have created a whole different brand for
Yeah.
sure. We have a question from the audience. Would you recommend tapping to negative emotions to connect with clients? If the answer is no, how would you explain the majority of the cosmetic industry who use insecurity to sell, showing perfect faces to sell products is trying to connect to the part of most women that they have to be perfect to look good? Your thoughts on this?
I do recommend tapping into negative emotions. So there's a brand out there, Huda Beauty is a well-known beauty brand. It's still independent. I think it's a $1 billion company, family owned, and became really popular, through the online world digitally and still does really well. And I think in looking at companies like that, or companies like Glossier that I earlier mentioned, those are companies that are actually not pushing the perfect faces to sell products. They're doing the complete opposite. They're tapping into self-expression and natural beauty and authenticity and untouched photos, no Photoshop, right? There's been campaigns even that they've put out where they said, we are consciously not using Photoshop because we want to represent the women in their most natural state, right? So I think a lot of it has been not that, but I think that you can tap into negative emotions to connect with your clients um, by, again, just being authentic and addressing issues that are out there in the forefront. I know Huda Beauty was one company, and I mentioned that in the book. At the time, there was a lot of controversy around a mascara or one of their beauty products that they put out, and one of the customers criticized the product and the whole process and all of that. And she ended up just coming out on Instagram and doing a 10-minute video explaining the entire process of product development and how that works and the claim that they have to put, on the product and all of those different things. And in reality, she didn't have to do any of that, but she used that negative emotion that existed in the consumer space. And obviously, it wasn't everybody, but it was enough for her to make a video and address it. And so she used that negative emotion to connect with clients through honesty and transparency when she didn't have to do that. Her products are selling anyway, right? So I think I hope that answers your question here.
Yeah, I think you did a good job with that. Measuring impact, can you share more detailed methodologies or tools that brands can use to measure the impact of their authenticity initiatives on consumer trust and loyalty?
Yeah, I think in the simplest way, and this is what we do at Blended Collective, to measure the impact of those initiatives on trust and loyalty, we utilize a tool like a Net Promoter Score, and it's just, 2, 3 simple questions just to gauge customer loyalty. And if people would refer us or would come back and do business with us, for the same or similar services. But beyond that, there are also other tools, again, depending on your resources, and what you're able to afford. But there's a company like Talkwalker who we referenced in the book several times, and they do this, brand love research quite regularly. And there's tools that you can use with them, such as brand sentiment analysis, on social media to assess public perception, or even just customer satisfaction surveys that you can employ to measure trust directly, things of that nature.
Balancing consistency and innovation. How can brands balance the need for consistency to build trust and reliability with the need for innovation to keep the brand fresh and exciting without compromising its authenticity?
Yeah, and those are consistency is one of the rational drivers in the book, actually. So and innovation is one as well. So those are both drivers that I talk about quite heavily. And I think a brand that exemplifies balancing those two drivers is Spotify. I hope we have some Spotify listeners here because I am one. But they maintain a consistent promise of providing personalized music experiences. So I remember last year, um, really every year they do this towards the end of the year, depending on your listening behavior and most of the music that you've gone through, they will actually personalize a video from the top artist that you listened to that year, right? And I thought that that was pretty neat. And so they maintain a consistent promise, not only of personalized music experiences like this, which is at the core of who they are, but they also continue to innovate, whether it's through their algorithms or, different features like Spotify Wrapped, or exploring different content types, podcast sessions, live sessions, things of that nature. So I think that allows them to stay relevant, but it also is very engaging to their customer. And it's very customer centric, that experience. So yeah.
Handling backlash when some are best practices. What are some of the best practices for brands to handle backlash authentically when consumers perceive their efforts as mere lip service, especially in light of examples like KFC and Trader Joe's?
Yeah, I talked about the KFC example earlier when you asked another question, but I think for Trader Joe's, and this is a case study I talk about in the book, um, Trader Joe's is a very interesting brand here in the US. And, they're known to be very culturally inclusive in the sense that they have and feature a lot of different products from all over the world, and they're also sourced from all over the world, right? So that whole like supplier diversity concept is definitely present, but I think there was a while where they were using stereotypical names in some of their certain product lines. And because they did that, that made them look very culturally insensitive. And initially, they tried to defend that brand choice by stating that the names they chose were really just about being fun and they were lighthearted ways of referencing culture. But eventually, they came around and they realized, the criticism was not going away. It was really harsh backlash. And so they announced that they were going to update some of those product labels and product names as a result of that. So I think the lessons in that again is own your mistake. Let customers know that you made that mistake, that you're human, and be transparent, but also be responsive. So don't just say, yes, we heard you, but also let the customer know how you're going to take their feedback and make changes for the better.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks say it, but they don't follow it. How do you ensure that a brand's purpose and sustainability efforts are genuinely aligned with their core mission rather than just being a marketing tactic to attract eco-conscious consumers? And I can tell you here in Asia, that's a
Mhm.
real big deal, especially among people under the age of 30.
Yeah.
Uh, if they don't come off as authentic in this particular area, even the party here, the Communist Party, that's become like really important to them. Like they're sincerely wanting to make these kinds of positive changes in the environment because they see the negative outcomes that have been happening.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Um, I think it's important to integrate those efforts deeply into the business model and into operations, not just the marketing, right? I think that's where companies sometimes make it a problem by just integrating it into everything that's external to the customer's eye. It's part of marketing, and that's where it becomes a check the box. And it was like this with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, right? Where people would do certain things as part of their marketing, but it wasn't really embedded in the company. But you forget that you have employees that are living that culture day in and day out. And if you don't authentically represent who that company is, employees will come and speak out, right? And again, with the social media, um, a lot of that has become easy to kind of do. Patagonia is a good example of a brand that kind of balances those two worlds. They use sustainable materials and processes across all of their product lines, but they also reinforce the commitment to environmental causes through their practices, right? I think that's probably one of the most purposeful but also sustainable brands that I've seen that is truly an
Absolutely.
inspiration.
Globally known for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Reflecting on consumer relationship dynamics, you mentioned that individuals like to be recognized as a person, an individual with unique traits, desires, needs, and experiences. In your opinion, how does the balance between leveraging consumer data for personalization and respecting consumer privacy impact the development of brand love? And that's kind of, for a while, negatively affected Facebook.
Yes, very much so. That's a good example. Um, I think that companies need to be transparent about their data use and also give customers control of their information, right? We saw in Europe, that's huge with the GDPR, um, the the fact that you have to disclose how you're going to share the data that you're collecting from customers very clearly, but you also need to give them an option to, not participate if they don't want to. So that's been a big change in the industry. I think that transparency builds trust, and the intelligent use of data enhances personalization. So trust and personalization in that space are both really crucial. And that's really what makes individuals feel heard, but also valued.
Personalization, you were just talking about versus customization. You
Mhm.
provided examples of personalization like Gatorade's swatch patch and customization, such as Starbucks customized orders. What strategies or factors should brands consider when deciding whether to prioritize personalization and customization or blend both of them in their marketing approach?
Yeah, I think that they should really consider what their target audiences prefer and what the nature of their products are. So, for instance, the GX Sweat Patch by Gatorade, that personalization enhances the user experience because you're able to tailor your health and fitness needs, right? So, that's good in that sense. For others, like Starbucks, customization allows customers to feel a sense of control, but also creativity in their choices. I mean, being able to just walk up and personalize your drink to however you want it, I think is strong. We also saw an example, and I reference this with my students when I teach sometimes, and I try to do this every semester actually. This Charlie drink at Dunkin' Donuts, which I haven't tried myself yet, but there was an influencer on TikTok that would go into Dunkin' Donuts and order this custom drink of hers. And customers started to go into Dunkin' Donuts to try and order the same drink, but obviously it wasn't an official drink to order, right? So Dunkin' Donuts ended up adding that to their menu, and it is now called the Charlie drink after the influencer. So, you see like customization can go really long ways. And I think in that way, it kind of helps add this brand customer connection of showing the flexibility and adaptation that a brand can take on when they see that it kind of provides satisfaction across their customer base.
What's the role that AI is playing, or how's your firm using AI when helping your clients with marketing or figure out the marketing strategy? What's the role AI is playing, and and what role do you see it playing going forward?
Yeah, I think it's really important. We jumped on the bandwagon pretty early on in the journey just to kind of explore and try out different AI tools. We're still in the process, honestly, of figuring out like what works better for what. But I think one, as marketers, I don't like to focus too much on the fear of AI is going to replace us marketers. I'd rather focus on how can I use AI to make sure that my daily work uh, is more efficient as a result, and I can focus on bigger things that actually matter. Right? So doing things like ideation or research and things of that nature, is where we've seen a lot of success with it. But we also want to be really mindful and careful with how we use it because of privacy issues, and legal and ethical issues, right? So that I think sometimes gets lost in the mix when you see what AI can do for you and how quick it can be. I mean, things like, if I'm writing a quick brief, or I know exactly what I'm trying to say, and I'm able to speak it into my phone, into ChatGPT, which is a cool feature on the phone. And I'm able to speak it in, and I say, okay, write me a document that says this and this and this and this, and it kind of just does it for you. And then of course you review it, but it's a time saver essentially too. So again, figuring out for us, how can we be more efficient to do the work that we do on a day-to-day basis and spend more time on the things that really do need more of our brain power and time.
I think consulting is going to have to change itself because of chat. I think that McKinsey and BCG and everybody who you were looking to do all this research, you're now, if you ask the right questions to Chat, Gemini, or we have one at two students create called MindPad, which has 1,500 corporate users now
Mm-hmm.
around the world. You're now able to get all of this research, spreadsheets, everything done for you in minutes for either nothing or next to nothing.
Yeah.
How do you see that changing the consulting world? I mean, it seems more like the expertise you bring is knowing how to ask the right question as opposed to handing them the actual research paper.
I think a big part of it is the process that we employ as consultants. I think that yes, you can use ChatGPT for a lot of things. I've even heard people say, "Oh, I don't need a marketer. I can just create my own content." And I've seen clients use ChatGPT in front of me, trying to
Yeah.
create headlines and emails and all of those things. And what gets lost is the brand voice and the brand tone and the personality and all of those things, right? So that's, yes, that's consulting, that's marketing, but it's consulting in the sense that we're able to go through a very particular process that we have identified that works for our clients, and clients don't know what that process is. And they can rely on ChatGPT to think they're getting the right answer. But I think having an expert in that space that understands what works and what doesn't work, and kind of has that checklist is crucial, right? So I think
Yeah,
there's
my
certain
daughter
elements
has
that
a
just can't be
global
replaced.
communications company like you that she
Mhm.
just does women's healthcare companies. And she said that's the whole difference for her as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Uh, Regarding the 8 brand love stages outlined in your approach to building brand loyalty, how do you recommend measuring a brand's progress at each stage, especially for newer brands that may not have the extensive customer data?
Yeah, so we have, I mean, there's 8 stages in the brand love model. And all of them have a different approach as it relates to measuring a brand's progress. But I would say, for newer brands that don't have a lot of extensive data, things like qualitative insights could be really important. So tapping into direct customer feedback, social media feedback, engagement metrics on social media, or even your website. I think those initial stages can be assessed by awareness and engagement levels too, which down the road can inform what loyalty can look like, right? I think that might be a little difficult to focus on in the beginning, but down the road, the goal is always like figuring out how can we focus on more loyalty and advocacy and repeat customers, or even referral frequencies, for that.
You mentioned that your mentor suggested that you take about 3 years to establish your brand. What are some key milestones or indicators that showed you your brand had reached a point of being established and recognized within your community?
Yeah, so when my mentor suggested that it would take about 3 weeks, I focused on a few different things. One was just the consistent customer engagement that we had, not only through social media and the online world, but also offsite, because we were hosting a lot of different events on a quarterly basis. And so there was recognition by different partners and local media outlets, community organizations. And so kind of helping with the promotion of what we did result in word of mouth, I think helped. And we also kept seeing repeat customers and repeat clients at some of those initiatives. So I think that was a clear indicator, that we were becoming more recognized and also trusted in our community.
I want to say thank you so much. The hour went really fast, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you. I actually hope you're going to write another book because you're a very thoughtful person. And
Thank
so I've
you.
really enjoyed listening to your commentary on all of this.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really
Yeah, I
appreciate
really
it.
enjoyed it. Everyone, have a wonderful weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. And please, everyone, have a safe weekend.